Hey y'all, Farmer Jesse here. Gonna move the sheep, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about what you need to just have a small flock of sheep and do them in a rotational grazing system. Sheep, 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 sheep. You guys ready to move? Not very spirited. All right, before we get into it, I've put up a video over at our Patreon page sort of elaborating how we're going to utilize our sheep in the no-till system and how that works out with USDA regulations and all those good things. So go check that out. Link below in the show notes or link here. All right, I'm gonna give you 7 things you need, but there's some things I'm not gonna get into. Obviously, you're gonna need some basic math skills, control over your temper, you're gonna need time, sunlight. Anyway, I'm not gonna get into all the advanced stuff you need to be a rotational grazer. For now, this one's for the noobs. Yeah, I'm gonna keep that in there. At this point in time, Hannah and I have either done ourselves or helped rotationally graze cattle, rotationally graze sheep, goats, chickens, children, ducks, turkey, am I missing anything? Pigs, lots of stuff. And each one has sort of its own nuances, so depending on what animal that you plan on raising, you will sort of have to gear your fencing and your strategy towards them. All right, so first let's talk about fencing. You can do permanent fencing. Permanent fencing is more expensive. It's also less flexible, obviously, because it's permanent. Where in rotational grazing, oftentimes you don't want to graze your pasture exactly the same way every single time. You want to turn it around a little bit and rotate so that those nutrients sort of move around. Grass seed can move to different places. And so for us, in order to do that, we use... No, I'm just kidding, it's off. This is from Premier One. This is just, I think this one's actually 36-inch netting, but you really don't need that high when you're grazing sheep. You can use it, you can use whatever their shorter one is, really. The higher, the better for things like goats, but really for goats, you need like prison fencing. You don't have to use this netting. This is electrifiable netting that we get from Premier One, so I'll put a link down there. You don't have to use this netting. You can just use strands of poly wire, but this is really nice for keeping predators out. Generally speaking, that poly wire can work really well if you have several strands low and high. So you probably, I would think for sheep, maybe it's a minimum of 4 strands, and that's just to ensure that coyotes don't get in, or wolves, or whatever you may have in your area, and that it ensures the sheep don't get out. Now that can be, you can have those strands on the outside, like perimeter fencing, I think is a really good idea. We don't have that yet, but we kind of are working towards that. I think it makes it more efficient when you already have your fencing in place. You do have to deal with tree limbs coming down, and you have to deal with grass growing up underneath it, and maybe, you know, saplings and stuff pushing it all over the place, and you do have to deal with the occasional deer running through it, but perimeter fencing can be really helpful for rotational grazing. And I like these nets primarily just because you can move them. You can pick them up and move them really easily. It takes me about, we have 13 sheep. I move them about every 36 hours. And it takes me about 20 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes to move them and set up their next paddock, which you always set up a paddock before. I talked a little bit more about how we rotational graze in a previous video, which may be on this side or this side, I can never remember. Check that out, but essentially we always set up their next paddock so that they are always ready to move them into the next paddock should they get out. And that's where the controlling the temper thing comes in nice and handy. You're also going to want some sort of energizer, something to actually charge the fence if you're using electric fencing. We use a solar charger, so this guy here. So we use this guy here. This is also from Premier One. It's called a suitcase charger. This one has a single battery in it. It's not super powerful. You can get really, really powerful solar chargers. I think this runs about $250. And you can get, you know, they go up from there, and the ones with the multiple batteries are really nice. And the beauty of these is that they're pretty easy to move. You have a ground rod, which is on the ground conveniently, because I haven't set it back up yet. And then you have a ground wire and a hot wire, and you attach the hot wire and you turn it on and off. If you don't turn it off, then you just get a nice reminder from your fence when you try to move it. And it's nothing crazy, it's pulsating, so it just pops. But you also, you can also get chargers that attach to your electrical grid, so you can just get, and those can be really powerful. Ours is not really that powerful. It's just enough to remind the sheep, like, hey dude, back up. Number 3 thing that you absolutely need is some sort of water. This is the only water we use for our sheep. It's just a bucket that holds about 5 gallons of water. They drink 1 of those a day, and then we move that with them. So when I'm moving them every 36 hours, I just dump this out, fill it up with a new bucket. It's super simple. I like this system because they're not tipping it over 99% of the time. Like a pig will tip over its water basically every single time. If it doesn't get in it and drain it, you really have to figure out a better water system for pigs. Sheep don't drink a lot of water. We get a lot of dew here in Kentucky in the mornings, so they really just don't need that much water. If they're lactating, and sometimes in the wintertime, they will drink a lot more water than even in the summertime. But yeah, so we just refill that every day. If you're doing cattle or if you're doing a lot of sheep, you're gonna need to think of a more permanent and more efficient system. And even we could use to have a big barrel with a float valve and all those things to keep water constantly pumping in there. You do risk your water just running out in those situations, the line breaking or a sheep rubbing that off or whatever. So I like this because I control the amount of water we're using and the amount of water we're wasting. Small scale, this is fine. So another thing you're gonna want is shade. We don't use any sort of artificial shading. So we don't use a shade shack or anything like that, at least not at the moment. I've thought about, there's a couple spots in my pasture where I don't have trees, but for the most part, we have kind of a silvo pasture of cedar trees, which are not great, but they work. Like, those are really nice, and you can kind of see where the sheep have sort of carved out a little bowl to get underneath those cedars. So I have enough of those throughout our pasture, except for excluding maybe 1 or 2 spots, where I can just give them access to those trees and I don't have to worry about providing them shade. Shade is important because, especially in the summertime here in the South, even sheep, they're white, they will overheat. And if you're running cattle, even if they're, you know, Devon or something that's red, is not quite like the Black Angus, even if you're running something like that or like a British white, you're gonna have to still think about some sort of shade, and especially things like pigs, they need access to water and they need access to shade in the summertime here. So, all right, minerals. We have just like a basic, we just use that little bucket and it has some salt and stuff in it. It's not covered or anything. For the most part, that works, but it's just a basic salt mix that we get. We like the Redmond salt. This I don't think is that. I think we may have just got this at Tractor Supply for the moment to get us by, but generally I like that Redmond salt. That stuff is really nice. You can go pretty crazy with minerals when it comes to sheep and pigs and all these, you know, you can get into kelp and zinc and all these different minerals. That's going to be depending on your system, what animal you're grazing, and just how involved you want to get with that part of the system. Our pastures are pretty healthy and our sheep have been really healthy. We haven't lost one to anything. We did lose one to a predator once, but in the 1.5 years that we've been running them on this property, we haven't lost them to any nutritional or any disease issues. And we don't use wormers or anything like that. The wormer is the rotation. You definitely have to provide some amount of mineral, but you don't have to go crazy with it. Here's one you're not going to see coming. You need some pasture. You need something for your animals to graze. And what I mean by that is that essentially you're going to have to figure out how much land you have that's viable for grazing, how much maybe land you have access to, maybe you can rent some land from a neighbor, and how many animals you can fit on that property. So we calculate right now with our stocking rates, which I'm not gonna get into. Like I said, I'll do another video if you want me to get into the more complicated advanced stuff. Maybe I will anyway, maybe even if you don't want me to. I'm kind of ornery like that. But based on our calculations, and I talked to my mentor Eric Smith down at Bug Tussle Farm, and then we kind of figured out about 18 sheep is what our pasture of 7 acres of decent to good forage can handle right now. So I'm hoping in the future maybe I could increase my stocking rate a little bit and have significantly more sheep, but I'm working up to that level. So we're at 13 right now. By the spring we should be at 18, but that's kind of what we figure we can handle on our pasture. You're gonna have to go calculate your own stocking rates based on how much land you have access to and what the forage looks like and what the animal is, or animals. You can also graze cattle and sheep together, or, you know, mix it up. Biodiversity, right? Mix it. Depending on what animal you're raising, you may want some amount of handling facilities. Somewhere to process them, you know, maybe castrate them if you need to late. You don't really need much. Like what we do is we have a couple barns right here. There's some space in between the barns, and we can put up fencing on either side of them and corral the sheep into that. We can grab them with a leg crook and then just lift them up and put them into the truck. It's not very hard for us because sheep are super easy. That's why we graze sheep. They're very, very easy to manage. However, if you're doing something like cattle, you may want something more substantial. Like with sheep, we've been able to even do it straight in the pasture with some you know, just set up a ring of cattle panels and collect sheep that way. And that has actually been pretty effective. We've done that several times. If you're doing something like cattle, you may need something more substantial. Pigs, honestly, another thing we learned from our mentor, Eric Smith, you can just park a trailer, like a covered trailer, up against their paddock and feed them in that trailer for a few days, and then after a few days they'll get used to it, and then you feed them and you lock it up and you can take them off to the processor or whatever you're gonna do. Every animal may require a slightly different management. And that's about it. Let me know if you guys have any questions about any one of those specific things. Let me know if I got anything wrong, or I always like that. I like it when people tell me when I'm wrong. I will take one good criticism over 1,000 attaboys any day. Please let me know anything you want me to elaborate on. And like I said, go check out the Patreon page. There is a video over there about how we're gonna integrate the sheep into our no-till system, which is gonna be cool. Like this video. If you like this video, make sure to hit the subscribe bobble when it pops up, or the subscribe button down below. There's also a little bell that's good to click on so that you get our updates when we update. Otherwise, we'll see y'all later. Bye.